Hi guys, tonight's story will not take you to a royal court or a candlelit ballroom. There will be no princes serenading you from a balcony or knights offering their hearts in embroidered verse. No, tonight, you're going to wake up in a place where courtship is replaced by coin, where privacy is optional, and where romance tends to leave through the back door quietly, and usually with the cutlery. Tonight, we're heading back to the year 1352 to a small, slightly slanted brothel on the outskirts of Bruges. And it's yours now. Lucky you. If you enjoy this kind of sleepy slip into the strange corners of history, feel free to tap the like button only if you'd like. You can subscribe if you're new and you want more dusty stories to fall asleep to. And if you're listening from somewhere far away or in the middle of a long night, let me know where you are and what time sleep decided not to show up. I always love hearing from fellow time travelers. Now take a breath deep and unhurried and picture this. You open your eyes to a draft of headache and a sound that can only be described as someone snoring into a bowl. Not yours. You're lying on what used to be a straw mattress, but now feels more like a sack of turnips. Your back is crooked. Your feet are cold, and somewhere in the building, a chicken has decided it's time to make an announcement. You've inherited, or perhaps just ended up running a brothel. Not the elegant kind with velvet drapes and soft music. No, this is the other kind. The kind where the front door is always slightly open, and at least one of your guests is asleep in the hallway with no pants and no explanation. This place is yours now. The madam. The keeper of keys and rules, and the only one who knows which towel is clean and which one is simply less dirty. The house is small, held together by warped beams prayer and 3 strategically placed buckets. There's a permanent smell of damp wool old ale and something you've given up trying to identify. You run this place with the dignity of someone who knows there's no dignity to be found, and you do it anyway. Outside Bruges is just beginning to stir. Cobblestones still glisten with last night's fog, and the carts haven't started rolling yet. But inside your walls, the night never quite ended. One of the girls is snoring on a bench by the hearth. Someone's boots are drying in the bread oven. And a merchant who you're fairly certain is not staying here officially is curled up beneath the table using a pile of scarves as a pillow. Again. You stretch slowly, not because you're lazy, but because experience has taught you that standing up too quickly in this place usually leads to stepping in something unpleasant. You wrap yourself in the shawl that doubles as your accounting ledger cover and peer into the front hall. The candle stub you left burning overnight has melted into the plate. Someone's borrowed your coin purse and left you 2 buttons and half a walnut in return. The first real task of the morning is to count your workers. Not formally, just a head count to make sure no one ran off, got arrested, or adopted a new identity after last night's clientele. You make a mental note. Barter is still here, sprawled across the bench with 1 boot on. Elski is missing, but her scarf is hanging on the doorframe, an unspoken code that means she's just outside, possibly chasing the goat again. This brothel operates somewhere between legitimacy and forgetfulness. In 14th century Bruges municipal councils often licensed brothels under strict conditions. They had to be located outside church zones, avoid operating on holy days, and were forbidden from accepting clergy as clients. Though that last part was more of a suggestion. Some cities taxed them directly. Others turned a blind eye as long as peace was kept, and disease didn't spread too quickly. Technically, your place falls under independent operation of moral flexibility. No paperwork, no protection, just a front door, a shaky floor, and the hope that nobody complains loudly enough. And then there are the rules. You wrote them yourself, inked carefully on a scrap of parchment, tacked to the wall near the stairs. No fighting in the common room. No credit unless you like being disappointed. No singing after midnight unless it's good, and it never is. But the rules, like the towels, are mostly decorative. People do what they do. You enforce what you can. And when all else fails, you bribe the goat. That goat, by the way, has tenure. No one remembers where he came from, but he's been here longer than the stairs. He eats everything except his own leash, and he's developed a taste for expensive shoes. A merchant once threatened to sue after the goat chewed through his velvet slippers. You offered him a discount on a hot bath and a slice of onion pie. He didn't come back, but he took the pie. Tidbits like this aren't uncommon here. Just last week, a guest left behind a sack of onions, 2 spoons, and a note that simply said, "Thanks, H." No one knows who H is. But the onions were good, so he's welcome back any time. As you shuffle toward the back, you pause at the communal brush. It sits in a small bowl of vinegar near the washing station, a loose term for the barrel of water that serves as a shared bath, a mop bucket, and occasionally a place to hide from responsibility. The brush is supposed to be for hair, but more than once you've caught someone using it to scrub the table. You've stopped asking questions. That way lies madness. In the corner of the room there's a chair no one sits in, not because it's cursed, though you wouldn't be surprised, but because tradition says whoever sits in that chair gets assigned the next unpleasant job. Last time Marta sat in it, she spent 3 hours chasing a runaway chicken through the roof beams. No one sat in it since. You step outside briefly to check the coop. The chickens look well. Hildegard, the largest and most opinionated, stares at you with something like judgment. She once laid an egg in a guest's shoe. He didn't notice until he tried to leave. You suspect she did it on purpose. The sun has started to rise, though it does so reluctantly. The sky over Bruges is gray with effort, and the stones underfoot are slick. You turn back inside and close the door, not because it keeps the cold out, but because it gives the illusion that something in this house is ever truly closed. And then you hear it. A soft rustle from the upper floor. A door creaks. A muffled yawn. The day has officially begun, and with it your job. Not just managing the flow of coin and complaints, but holding this entire chaotic enterprise together with wit vinegar and the occasional lie told for the greater good. You are not just a madam. You are a strategist, a cleaner, a therapist, and on Tuesdays a reluctant chicken wrangler. And today has only just begun. You never meant to run the place like a monastery. But when you've had 3 broken stools, 2 minor fires, and 1 near duel over a pie slice all before breakfast, you start thinking that maybe a little structure wouldn't hurt. So you did it. You wrote house rules. There they are now, nailed proudly to the hallway beam in ink, made from soot and vinegar. The parchment curls slightly at the edges, as if even it is unsure whether it's going to last the day. In a perfect world, these rules would bring order, decorum, and maybe a morning without someone yelling, "I didn't touch your goat," at full volume. Rule 1. No shouting before noon. This was broken within 3 minutes by 2 clients arguing over who left a shoe in the bread oven. Rule 2. Absolutely no fistfights in the common room. This one lasted a noble 6 minutes, until Marta threw a ladle at someone who tried to leave without paying. To be fair, she only hit the soup pot, and now you're down 1 ladle. Rule 3. Singing is permitted only after dark and only if it's good, which is to say, never. Yet as you pass the stairwell, you hear Elski attempting a love ballad in a key that doesn't exist. It ends in a cough and a hiccup. You sigh, but you carry on. You add a new rule to the list, number 17, scrawled beneath the others with tired fingers. No borrowing the house cat for dramatic reenactments. You don't want to talk about it. The cat still hasn't forgiven Marta, or you. Despite the chaos, you're not alone in trying to enforce some version of order. In medieval cities like Bruges and Paris, brothels were often subject to municipal oversight, especially in periods when civic leaders were keen on appearing morally vigilant. Some required the posting of house rules, written in vernacular language, and displayed prominently, usually near the entrance or hearth. These rules ranged from the practical, no drinking on duty, to the painfully obvious, no biting the guests even if they ask. In some areas, city officials even conducted spot inspections. A clerk would arrive unannounced. usually right in the middle of something inconvenient, and quiz the madam about hygiene occupancy, and whether all women were of legal working age, which at the time could mean as young as 12, depending on local law. If you think surprise audits are stressful, now imagine conducting one in a room full of drying underclothes and half-dressed merchants. Of course, most of your rules here are enforced not with law, but with creativity. Like the broomstick of authority, which is ceremoniously passed between staff members, as a sign that someone's been put in charge for the next hour. Currently, it's propped against the hearth, awaiting a brave hand. You tried fines once. It didn't take. The coin just kept disappearing and showing back up in Marta's boot or the goat's mouth. Discipline is more performance than punishment. You give warnings with a raised eyebrow and a well-timed clink of the broomstick. It's less about scolding and more about rebalancing the natural disorder of the house. Someone bursts through the front door. It's Geisbert again, the lute player who pays in gossip and overcooked turnips. He's barefoot, he smells like fermented radish, and he's singing something about a barmaid and a bishop. You gently remind him about rule number 8. No impromptu concerts unless someone asks. No one ever asks. He grins, hands you a small wheel of cheese, and sits down uninvited. You consider this a bribe and accept it. In a Parisian brothel recorded in 1356, there was indeed a rule about singing no ballads after curfew unless paid in cheese. It wasn't a joke. Cheese, after all, was currency you could eat. You'd take it over some of the coins you've been handed lately, especially the ones stamped with a bishop's face and a questionable stain. Back in your house, the rules are starting to evolve into folklore. There's the mysterious, "Don't open the third drawer," a rule added after someone found a squirrel hiding in the linens. And of course, no poetry before breakfast, which was established after one unfortunate client tried to woo Marta with 12 verses and a lute solo. She hit him with a spoon, twice. But even rules need rest, and so do you. You wander into the back room where a few of the girls are sipping watered wine and debating whether yesterday's stew was made with eel or just unfortunate chicken. No one knows and no one is brave enough to check the pot. You sit with them not to lecture but to listen. This house survives not because of the rules, but because of the people who agree more or less to follow just enough of them to keep the walls standing. One of the girls, young and clever-eyed, asks if there's ever been a day without a single rule broken. You laugh gently. Only once, you say, and everyone thought the house was haunted. You sip your wine. Someone starts humming. The broomstick of authority is still by the hearth untouched. For now, peace reigns. But in this house, peace is just a pause between verses. By now the house is humming like a slightly off-key choir doors, creaking open chamber pots, sloshing the occasional shriek, as someone discovers the goat has once again chewed through the laundry line. You've barely finished your first sip of watered wine when it begins the arrival of clients. They come as they always do, unpredictably, unevenly, and often far too early for anyone's liking. The first one of the day is a traveling onion merchant, judging by the smell and the fact that he tries to pay in bulbs. He stands in the doorway with a hopeful smile and a woven sack that's rustling suspiciously. You take one look and wave him inside with the resigned grace of someone who's seen worse and who could use a few onions. Your establishment, like many in 14th century Bruges, exists in a liminal space, technically illegal, functionally tolerated, and always, always needed. Clients arrive from every social rank, though rarely the polite parts of society. Sailors, millers, widowers, apprentices, even the occasional monk who's lost his way. You've learned not to ask questions. People pay in coin when they can, and when they can't, you get creative. Over the years, you've accepted payment in paltry salted fish boots, a jar of dubious pickled eggs, and once memorably, a full set of carved dice depicting saints in increasingly compromising poses. You still keep those hidden behind the hearth conversation starters for very specific conversations. Some of the clients are regulars, and like mold in the cellar, they grow on you in a way you're not proud of. There's Willem the Cooper, who always brings plum jam and leaves without incident. There's Jackie, who smells like burnt flour and insists he's descended from nobility, though nobility likely would have learned to wash. And then there's Father Bertram, who claims to be here for pastoral outreach, and once paid double just to pet the goat and cry into a napkin. You let him. We all have our coping mechanisms. There is, of course, no such thing as an ideal client. The ones who try too hard are usually hiding something. The ones who say nothing are often worse. But in this line of work, you learn to measure character not by words, but by the way someone closes a door or asks for clean water without a sneer. This morning you find yourself playing host guard and occasional translator. A Flemish trader arrives mid-morning, speaking fast and waving a coin that may or may not be real. You nod, smile, and point him toward a room where the window doesn't rattle too loudly in the wind. You hope he doesn't notice the goat watching from the stairwell. You're in the middle of sorting dried herbs near the hearth when Elske pulls you aside. She's been offered a chicken in lieu of payment. Again. You examine the bird. It's alert, lopsided, and missing a few feathers. Possibly traumatized. You accept it. At least it won't eat your shoes. In truth, these kinds of exchanges weren't so unusual. Many brothels across Europe, especially in poorer districts, operated on mixed economies. Clients would barter for services using goods, grains, tools, textiles, or services of their own. One historical account from 14th century Barcelona details a man who paid for 3 visits by offering to repair the brothel's shutters. He returned the following week, only to be charged double after the shutters fell off mid-storm. It wasn't always unpleasant, though. Some brought gifts, fresh bread, woolen mittens, or sweetmeats wrapped in cloth. Little tokens meant to smooth over awkwardness, or pretend this was something more genteel than a transaction. You keep a small box under your bed where you stash the nicest ones. A carved hairpin, a bit of amber, a dried sprig of lavender. You never show it to anyone, of course. Sentimentality is a luxury you can't afford, but still it's there. And then there are the unwelcome types, like the man who insists on reciting poetry before paying. Always the same 4 lines, always with a dramatic pause before the word moonlight. He does not tip. Or the one who believes he's found true love after a single conversation and starts composing ballads by the hearth. You gently suggest he take his feelings elsewhere, preferably far away. But even these characters blend into the rhythm of your days. There's always a knock at the wrong time, a spill you can't trace, a laugh that turns too sharp. You move through it all like a ship on a choppy canal, steady, squinting ahead and hoping no one's thrown up on the deck again. Outside, the fog has lifted just enough for sunlight to glint off the wet cobblestones. You step out briefly to hang a few damp linens, partly for drying, mostly to signal to passers-by that, yes, the house is open, and yes, it's marginally cleaner than yesterday. Across the street, an old woman selling turnips gives you a knowing nod. She's seen it all. Probably worked in a house like yours once. You nod back, grateful for the unspoken solidarity that lives in shared glances and tired backs. By midday, the house is full again, noisy, unpredictable, and somehow still standing. A lute string snaps upstairs. Someone drops a basin. The goat sneezes. And you, madam of all this glorious disorder, take a moment to sit by the hearth, sip what passes for tea, and wonder briefly if the onion merchant will return this time with a better chicken. The rules may not work. The clients may not pay. But somehow this place keeps going. And so do you. There's a moment, brief, precious, and entirely unreliable, when the house settles just enough that you dare to believe someone somewhere might be sleeping. Of course, that illusion lasts exactly until a broom clatters down the stairs and someone curses in 2 languages. You sigh. Time to check the rooms. The upstairs hallway is narrow, low-ceilinged, and permanently scented with a bouquet of dried thyme, stale ale, and something more ambiguous. Possibly mildew, possibly regret. Doors line the corridor, each one slightly crooked, held shut by hook's latches, or in one case a particularly stubborn chair. You open one gently. Inside, straw mattress wool blanket, tiny window sealed with waxed cloth, and a curtain strung up for modesty that gives up entirely when there's a breeze. The client inside is asleep or unconscious. It's hard to tell, sprawled across the bed with one boot still on, and a candle stub burning dangerously close to a puddle of something. You blow it out, adjust the curtain, and close the door with the practiced silence of someone who has tiptoed past many mistakes. In another room, you find two girls arguing over who gets the corner fur blanket. It's not fur, just sheepskin worn bald, but it's warm. You mediate by flipping a coin which disappears immediately into someone's cleavage. You don't ask whose. Privacy in a place like this is mostly ceremonial. Each room is technically private, but the walls are thin and the floorboards carry sound like a choir. A sneeze on one end of the house can startle the goat on the other. Still, you do what you can, hang curtains, space out shifts, and keep the clean straw rotated. You've even added tiny touches of hospitality. A chipped mug here, a bundle of herbs there, a small carved token under each pillow, meant to ward off bad dreams. Of course, some dreams are too big to fit in these rooms. Medieval brothels rarely offered the comfort or cleanliness of the boudoir romanticized in paintings centuries later. A room, if available at all, was often just that, a corner with a straw mat and a curtain for the illusion of solitude. In many places, including Bruges and London brothel quarters, were communal or semi-partitioned. The goal wasn't luxury, it was efficiency. Turnover mattered more than thread count. In regulated cities, brothels might provide beds that were technically shared across shifts. You change the straw, the client changes, and the next person comes in. Some establishments went so far as to employ bed warmers, not in the romantic sense, but literal someone who lay in the bed first to heat it up in winter. That job, thankfully, has not been proposed here. Yet. Back downstairs, someone's asking for a fresh towel. You find one cleanish and deliver it with a nod. It disappears into the hallway like everything else. You suspect half your linen has simply grown legs. In the far room behind the squeaky floorboard, and beneath the cracked beam, lies what you half-jokingly call the honeymoon suite. It's slightly larger, has a table that doesn't wobble too much, and a mirror so cloudy it reflects mostly emotion. Clients love it. You suspect they like believing they're in a better room than the one next door, even if all they're really getting is fewer splinters. A younger girl new to the house and still tucking her hair nervously behind her ears peeks out from behind the curtain. Should I ask if he's staying long? You shake your head. Wait till he snores. That's how you know it's safe to take the coin. She nods solemnly. Another lesson passed down in whispers and practice. The rooms are quiet again temporarily. You make your way through each adjusting linens, replacing candle stubs, smoothing corners. A small ritual of control in a world designed to fray. You pause at one door. Inside, Elski is curled up on her side, one arm slung protectively over a rolled-up blanket. Her hair is a mess of braids and ribbons half undone. She mutters something in her sleep, something about plum tarts and goats. You smile. Let her rest. She's earned it. And you haven't really slept in days. Not properly. But you steal rest in pieces 5 minutes by the hearth, a doze on the steps. Eyes closed while pretending to listen to a client's long-winded tale of how he almost joined the clergy. Almost. In this house, sleep is less a need than a negotiation. And when it does come, it comes crooked like the beds, like the floors, like everything else you hold together with thread and willpower. As you descend the stairs again, the front door creaks in the wind. The goat has dragged something into the hallway, a ribbon, possibly martyrs, or a trophy. He snorts and retreats into his corner, with the satisfaction of someone who knows no one can stop him. You adjust your shawl, tuck a curtain back into place, and prepare for whatever knock or crash comes next. In a house where no one truly sleeps, you've become the one who keeps the quiet stitched together, however briefly, however gently. And even in this, there's something almost noble. The bathwater is warm, or at least it was hours ago before 3 people used it, and someone dropped in half a meat pie by accident. Now it's tepid, suspiciously opaque, and gently steaming in the cold air like a witch's brew of regret and soap shavings. You stand beside it with a slotted spoon, fishing out bits of lint, and something that may once have been a turnip peel. Bathing in your brothel is not an event. It's a ritual of compromise. There's one large wooden tub deep enough to sit in, shallow enough to regret, and wide enough to splash your elbows only if you don't move your knees. Everyone shares it. Not at once, thank heaven, but on rotation, and always in the same order, oldest to youngest, unless someone pays extra or someone cries. The first bather of the day is already gone. She took with her half the soap, most of the warm water, and your only dry rag. The second left footprints, giggles, and a trail of rose petals that you strongly suspect came from a pillow sachet meant for guests. The third was Marta, who soaked her feet, plucked her eyebrows, and declared herself ready for business, with the confidence of someone who hadn't noticed the goat staring through the window the entire time. Now it's your turn. You ease into the bath, slowly hissing, as the water meets the bruises you didn't notice until now. The bottom of the tub is slick from someone's herbal rinse mint, and vinegar, you think, and there's a faint slosh as you settle. It's not luxurious. It's not even particularly clean, but it's warm. Mostly. And in this house, that's enough. Bathing customs in the Middle Ages varied wildly by region and class. In many towns, including Bruges, bathhouses were communal spaces used by both sexes, often with limited privacy. Brothels sometimes maintained private bathing areas, though private is a generous term. A wooden tub, a bucket of water, and a cloth for modesty, that was the standard. Heated water was a luxury usually achieved by filling the tub once and reusing the same bathwater across multiple clients or workers. In some cities, bathhouses doubled as informal brothels, blurring the line between hygiene and hospitality. You scrub behind your ears with a brush that has more bristles missing than present. There's a moment of silence, true silence, broken only by the creak of wood and the drip of condensation from the ceiling. You lean back, breathing in the scent of lavender vinegar and wet socks. Someone must have left theirs on the stove again. Elske appears in the doorway with a towel draped over one shoulder and a chicken tucked under the other. "I think this one's got fleas," she says. "Chicken or towel?" She shrugs. Does it matter? You wave her away. You're in no mood for poultry diagnostics right now. She leaves humming the kind of tune that means she's up to something, and you let the steam fog your vision for a bit longer. It's not peace, but it's as close as you get. A few minutes where no one's asking for coins, cloth, or company. Just you, your bath, and a faint sense that the floorboards might give out at any moment. You pull the plug. The water drains with a sigh, taking with it the petals, the lint, and whatever was clinging to your ankle. You rise, slowly wrap yourself in a shawl that doubles as a curtain, and step over the puddle forming near the hearth. Someone knocks on the outer door. You don't answer. Instead, you set a kettle on the coals and fish out the communal brush from its vinegar bowl. It's missing more bristles now. The handle is sticky. You sigh. Use it anyway. There are standards here, even if they're held together by splinters and optimism. The goat is standing near the hearth again, watching. You make a face at him. He blinks. You mutter something unkind about his lineage, and pour yourself a cup of boiled water steeped with dried mint. It's technically tea. Technically. From outside comes a voice asking politely if the bath is available. You tell them to wait. You're cleaning. That's not true, but it buys you a few more minutes. You sit in the chair by the stove, the one no one likes, because it tilts and stretches your feet toward the warmth. Your hair is damp. Your bones ache. But you are briefly clean, or at least cleaner than the goat. And that on a day like this feels like victory. Tidbits from your records clutter your thoughts. like the time a client offered a live eel in exchange for bath access. You accepted. Cook stewed it with onions and swore it tasted like revenge. Or the guest who asked for flower petals in her bath and received cabbage leaves. She didn't notice. She was nearsighted. And you've grown used to improvisation. You know exactly how long it takes to heat water over coals. You know which boards creak and which ones hide stashes of soap. You know that no matter how many people use this tub, no one will ever clean the brush properly, and still you keep the bath filled. Because there's dignity in dirt, yes, but there's also something quietly heroic in chasing a little warmth through a world that keeps demanding your strength and giving you lint in return. You drain the kettle, you mop the floor, you light another candle and hang the towel by the window to catch what sunlight remains. The bath is ready again. And so are you. Section 6. The smell hits you before you round the corner. A bubbling, hopeful sort of aroma, equal parts onion thyme, and something that might once have been eel, or is still eel. Hard to tell. You lift the pot lid and take a peek. Whatever's in there, it's floating gently, like it's reconsidering its life choices. You stir it with a caution honed by experience and adjust the fire. This is breakfast, or lunch, or dinner. It doesn't matter. In this house, meals aren't timed, they're available. You eat when you can, and you don't ask what it is. The cook doesn't tolerate picky eaters. She has 2 rules. Don't waste food and don't ask questions. Break either, and you'll be peeling turnips until your grandchildren are old. You ladle out a bowl for yourself and sit on the stool by the hearth, the one that wobbles slightly to the left, but never quite falls. Across the room, Marta is mending a sock while balancing a cup of broth on her knee. She looks up and squints at the pot. Is that the eel from yesterday? You nod. Plus onion. And hope. She hums. Tastes better with hope. You sip carefully. It's hot, salty, and vaguely comforting, like being hugged by someone who just came in from the rain. The broth sticks to your ribs and coats your tongue, and for a few minutes you don't think about coin purses clients or the goat scratching at the door again. Meals here are not just about food. They're pauses, short, essential moments where people gather, sit, breathe. Even in chaos, the kitchen is the closest thing to neutral ground. You don't argue over soup, not if you want seconds. In medieval brothels, food was rarely elaborate, but it was essential to keeping both workers and clients alive and somewhat placated. Many establishments provided simple stews, grain porridge or meat pies made from whatever was cheapest, or left over from the market. The kitchens were often makeshift, staffed by women who doubled as cleaners or assistants. In Bruges, some brothels were known to serve a single communal meal per day, supplemented by whatever the workers could trade or bring in themselves. Salted fish and onions were staples. Bread was a luxury, and eels surprisingly common, abundant, cheap, and according to some quite tasty when boiled in ale. According to others, it's what sadness tastes like. You remember once someone tried to impress the house by roasting a pigeon. It worked until the pigeon turned out to belong to the landlord's wife. You had to replace it with a paper bird tied to a string. No one was fooled, but no one complained either. It now hangs above the hearth, swaying in the draft, a greasy little mascot with one bent wing. Elske walks in her hair damp, holding a bowl of something that might be soup or just warm water with ambition. You'll never guess what the goat chewed. Don't tell me. Your ledger. Of course. You finish your stew and sigh. The ledger can wait. The soup cannot. In the corner, the cook is chopping leeks with the precision of someone imagining the knife is a client who didn't pay. She doesn't speak unless addressed, and even then it's mostly with gestures and tuts. Her ladle is sacred. So is her temper. And if she sees you take more than one slice of bread, she'll swat you with the spoon so hard it echoes. Still, she's fair. She feeds everyone, even the goat on occasion. And there's something oddly beautiful about this place in these rare, quiet minutes. When the pot simmers, the air is warm and the table creaks under the weight of half-mended cloth and shared stories. The food might be humble, but it binds the house together more tightly than any written rule. You glance out the window. Bruges is waking again. A cart rattles by, leaving a trail of straw and gossip. Somewhere in the street, a boy is shouting about eggs. Or maybe he's shouting at the eggs. Either way, you know the rhythm. The day is about to pick up speed. You gather the bowls. Elski is already asleep again on the bench, the empty bowl tipped toward her like a weary offering. Marta hums as she folds her mended sock into a neat little ball, and the cook eyes sharp and ladle-raised watches. You return the pot lid to its place with all the reverence of someone closing a holy text. You nod to her. She nods back. It's a small exchange, but it matters. In this house, so many things do. Out in the hallway, the goat sneezes. You step past him with your bowl and a heel of bread and wonder just briefly how many people in this city are doing exactly what you're doing right now. Eating stew that tastes like hope, counting small victories, and pretending not to notice the chaos creeping up the stairs. You chew thoughtfully. Today might be awful, but at least it started warm. There's something unnerving about silence in a place like this. It's never truly quiet, just less noisy in ways that make you suspicious. When the shouting stops, when the footfalls disappear, and when no one's arguing about who borrowed whose shawl without asking, that's when your stomach clenches. Because in this house, silence isn't peace. It's foreshadowing. You finish folding a pile of rags that used to be respectable towels, place them on a stool and tilt your head. Nothing. No cackling, no goats, not even Marta's usual muttering as she counts coins for the third time, hoping they've somehow multiplied through optimism. You wait. Then, like the gods heard your doubts and decided to punish your hubris, a chicken screams. Not a cluck. A scream. A sharp, undignified screech that sounds like someone tried to teach it Latin and failed spectacularly. You groan. Not again. You find the chicken Hildegard naturally perched triumphantly atop the wash basin, glaring at her reflection in the water, like it owes her money. The basin is knocked over. Water spreads across the floor in slow defiance. And in the middle of it all is a shoe, not a pair, just one. A man's boot, polished, slightly damp, abandoned. You don't want to know. You pick up the chicken tucker under your arm and make a mental note, interrogate everyone about the boot. You already know no one will admit to it. Someone will claim it was always there. Someone else will suggest it belongs to the goat. And by tomorrow it'll be part of the furniture. You mop up the water, muttering to yourself, and brace for the rest of the day. There's a door slam, followed by hushed whispers, and then the distinct sound of someone attempting to sneak, while stepping on every squeaky floorboard on purpose. A client no doubt trying to leave without settling his tab. You intercept him in the hallway. He's clutching a pouch and wearing only a shirt and your missing towel. You raise an eyebrow. He offers you a smile and 2 coins. You accept both, then gesture to the hook where the towel belongs. He hands it over sheepish and tiptoes down the stairs. You follow behind, not out of mistrust, but because someone has to relock the door behind him, and you've learned from experience that he won't do it himself. Medieval brothels, particularly in urban centers like Bruges, were often sources of noise complaints, not just from neighbors, but from local authorities who feared the disruption of public peace. Clients could become rowdy, especially during festivals or market days, and fights were not uncommon. Some establishments tried to enforce quiet hours or curfews, but these were rarely followed. In 14th century records from Ghent and Bruges, fines were imposed on brothel keepers when disturbances occurred after sundown, particularly if they involved singing, gambling, or public drunkenness. Of course, defining public was tricky when most walls were paper thin and doors never quite closed properly. Back in your common room, you do your daily inventory check. You count coins, well buttons, and 2 actual coins. You check supplies, 3 candles, a half-used bar of soap, 1 bottle of diluted wine, and a mysterious pie that's been sitting on the shelf, long enough to qualify as a resident. You do not touch the pie. Then you do your real inventory bruises. Marta has a cut on her knuckle. She says it's from the cupboard, but you've known her too long to believe that. Elski limps slightly. She waves it off as bad shoes. You offer her the good pair, the ones without holes in the sole, and she accepts with the wary gratitude of someone who understands gifts here often come with strings. You check your own hands. A blister from the stove. A scratch you don't remember earning. Nothing unusual. But you notice how everyone's shoulders slump a little lower today. How their laughs come a little slower. How even the goat seems less mischievous. This house isn't falling apart, it lives falling apart. It's held together by stubbornness, by jokes whispered too late at night, and by the unspoken promise that you're all here for each other, even if you mostly communicate through sarcasm and shared bread crusts. There's a knock at the back door. You open it to find a delivery boy standing with a sack of laundry and a note from someone named H, who you suspect is still trying to pay you in vegetables. The note simply says, "Sorry for the eel. Here's turnips." You sigh and take the sack. Turnips again. Well, they're edible, mostly. Elski passes behind you with a bucket of soapy water and says without context, "Don't go in the 3rd room. The mirror's broken and someone's drawn a face on the wall in jam." You blink. You nod. She disappears. You heat the water anyway. Wipe down the door handles. Check the mirror situation and scrape the jam off the plaster. You fix the curtain that hangs as a door between the sleeping quarters and the rest of the house. And you straighten the chairs even though you know by sundown they'll be knocked over again. This is your life. You do the mending. You soothe the tempers. You light the candles and collect the buttons. You record everything in the new ledger, the one that isn't chewed, and you wonder just briefly how anyone survived in a brothel, without a good mop and an even better sense of humor. There's a story you once heard about a brothel in 14th century Paris, where the madam made new hires recite poetry during roll call. If they fumbled the lines, they had to clean the latrines. One girl became so good at verse that she published a book of poems, under a false name naturally. No one knows what happened to her, but a faded copy of her work was once found behind a church pew in Marseille. Scribbled on the back, page 4 is wrong. The goat never wore the hat. You laugh at the memory, not because it's funny, but because it feels like something that could happen here. You move to the kitchen again. The soup is gone. Someone left you a heel of bread wrapped in a cloth with a note, "For the goat wrangler." No signature. You sit. You eat. You breathe. And you listen. Silence again. But this time it feels earned. The sun rises reluctantly over Bruges, casting a grayish light that seems unsure of its own usefulness. Inside your brothel, the day starts not with ceremony, but with inventory. An inventory of damages, misplacements, odd smells, and the small bruises of both ego and shin. You move slowly, not because you're tired though you are, but because experience has taught you that rushing in this house usually leads to stepping in something regrettable. Your first order of business is the coins, or what passes for them. You find a small pile of mixed currency on the counter, a few crooked pfennigs, 2 foreign tokens from somewhere up the Hanseatic coast, a bead shaped like a lion, and what might be a game piece from a tavern you've never heard of. There's even a handwritten note in awful Latin, promising payment in future consideration, which history has taught you is code for never. You place all of it in the jar you've labeled maybe money, which currently contains more buttons than silver. Next, you survey the state of the furniture. A bench is leaning in a way it definitely wasn't yesterday, and a pair of wooden spoons has mysteriously gone missing. The tablecloth is hanging out back, dripping onto a chicken, who does not look amused. The list of things to clean, fix, or simply pretend are fine grows longer by the minute. There are also bruises to account for not all of them visible. You notice one forming on your shin from where you collided with the stove, and Marta has a smudge on her cheek that could be wine jam, or the result of trying to break up last night's argument over whose boots were whose. Somewhere between wiping down the counter and retrieving a mop, you pause to glance at the brothel's house rules. You wrote them yourself in careful script on parchment, now tacked to the wall near the stairs. They are more decorative than authoritative guidelines rather than laws. One rule advises against fighting in the common room, a hopeful suggestion that was thoroughly ignored last night when someone decided a bench made a perfectly good weapon. Another requests no singing after midnight unless it's genuinely pleasant. You've yet to hear anyone meet that standard. A third rule suggests that no one should touch the goat, and for good reason. He's developed a taste for sleeves and doesn't appreciate being startled. Yet another notes that if something smells, it should be cleaned, and if it moves, permission should be requested before engaging. Unsurprisingly, this is the rule most often violated. Lastly, there's a whimsical entry about accepting buttons as payment on Tuesdays, which has ironically resulted in a noticeable uptick in button offerings, particularly on Wednesdays. In medieval Bruges, brothel regulations weren't just internal. Municipal authorities often imposed detailed requirements for cleanliness behavior and location. Licensed establishments were required to post public codes of conduct rules that ostensibly kept things orderly. However, enforcement was inconsistent. City officials rarely intervened unless complaints piled up, or the neighborhood clergy became particularly loud about moral decay. Many brothel owners had to walk a fine line, balancing the needs of the house with the often contradictory expectations of civic authorities and local customers. Your house, technically operating without a license, survives in that hazy space between tolerated nuisance and quiet necessity. As you move from the front hall toward the wash area, you notice your ledger is missing from its usual spot near the hearth. A trail of chewed parchment leads to the goat, who is predictably trying to digest your bookkeeping. You retrieve what you can sigh and mentally subtract 2 hours from your evening because that's how long it'll take to rewrite the week's entries. The goat blinks at you with no remorse and returns to gnawing on a curtain. The kitchen is warmer, filled with the remnants of this morning's stew and the sound of someone attempting to find spoons. The ladle is missing again, either used as a hammer, a shoehorn, or a musical instrument. Possibly all three. Barter is reorganizing the shelf of condiments, which consists mostly of vinegar and a jar labeled spice, the contents of which are both questionable and oddly fragrant. Elske appears barefoot and carrying a cloth that was once a towel, but now resembles something that lived through a storm. She informs you with an air of dramatic finality that the house has no clean linens. You nod and make a note to boil the tablecloth. Again, by midday, the tally of damages includes 2 cracked mugs, 1 mysterious puddle, and a door latch that now only works if you sing to it. You also find a pair of socks drying over the bread oven and a set of footprints leading from the water barrel to the front hall, barefoot, muddy, and somehow glittery. There is no explanation, and you've learned not to ask. You sit down briefly, not because the work is done, but because the patch of sun falling across the kitchen floor looks particularly inviting. It's the kind of light that makes things look cleaner than they are, and moods feel softer than they should. For a few moments, no one is yelling. The goat isn't chewing anything vital, and the teapot is making a noise that might be mistaken for contentment. These are the moments that keep you going, not the pay meager and erratic, or the prestige which doesn't exist, but the rare flickers of peace that drift through the brothel like a breeze that knows not to stay too long. You've become an expert in detecting them, savoring them, and storing them up for the hours ahead. As the light shifts, you rise, brush the crumbs from your skirt, and resume the slow task of maintaining order in a house that resists it at every turn. You straighten the chairs, repin the rules, and tuck the rewritten ledger under your shawl. Elske is humming now, something off-key and vaguely optimistic. Marta is stitching a hem with the patience of someone who knows the thread will snap anyway. Outside, Bruges is alive with the sounds of carts and bells, and merchants shouting about oysters. Inside, your brothel breathes in time with the city noisy stubborn and slightly off balance, but still standing. You walk through the hallway, making a mental note to replace the candle that has dripped wax down the wall. The door squeaks as you close it. The latch sticks. The air smells like soup soap and the faintest whiff of candle smoke. And despite everything, the day is not lost. Not yet. The world tilts, not dramatically, but just enough to pull you from one place to another. Bruges slips away like a dream, half remembered. And when you open your eyes again, the floor beneath you is smooth, lacquered wood, polished to a quiet shine. The air smells of camellia oil and incense. Somewhere nearby, a stringed instrument hums a note that doesn't quite resolve. You're not in medieval Europe anymore. You are in Edo Japan sometime in the 18th century, and you're dressed in 6 layers of silk so heavy that standing feels more like an intention than an action. Your name is now carefully chosen, poetic and mysterious, the kind that's written in brushstrokes you're not allowed to misplace. You are an oiran, a high-ranking courtesan, the kind who walks with slow, stylized steps on wooden clogs nearly half a foot tall, so that each appearance becomes a performance in itself. You don't work in just any brothel. You live in the yukaku, the licensed pleasure quarters of Edo, in a world so curated and regulated that it almost feels unreal. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not emptiness, but precision. Every footstep is placed with intent. Every smile is rehearsed. Every conversation carries layers of meaning beneath a mask of politeness. There's no shouting, no wandering chickens, no missing spoons or chewed ledgers. But it would be a mistake to think it's easier here. In many ways, this life is a tighter cage, gilded, perfumed, but still a cage. Your duties are endless and exhausting. You are expected to entertain with poetry music, calligraphy, and the delicate art of saying just enough, but never too much. Your clients are powerful men, merchants, officials, scholars who expect grace wit and absolute poise. Even when your feet ache and your kimono pulls at your shoulders, your face must remain unreadable, your voice calm, your gestures fluid. You pour tea with practiced elegance, all while calculating which patron is worth your time and which smile might yield a better gift. Behind you, the tayu, the courtesans of even higher rank, glide through the corridors like living paintings, their hair towering with ornaments, their every movement dictated by custom and status. To reach that level requires not just beauty, but disciplined memorization and years of unrelenting training. And even then, no matter how high you climb, the walls remain the same. Outside the yukaku, the rest of Edo moves to a different rhythm. Courtesans are both admired and restricted icons of refinement, who are paradoxically forbidden from mingling freely with the world that praises them. You're allowed to appear in public, only during select processions like the Oirandochu, where you walk in elaborate robes through the streets, watched by crowds who see only the surface. It is spectacle, not freedom. Historically, the yukaku were tightly regulated by the Tokugawa shogunate. The idea was to contain moral excess by designating specific areas for licensed pleasure, such as Yoshiwara in Edo. These districts were meant to be self-contained with walls, gates, and guards. Within them, courtesans were sorted into ranks, with the highest requiring years of training in arts and manners. But these ranks weren't just about skill. They were also a method of control. High-ranking courtesans were treated like aristocracy on the surface, but few could ever leave their roles unless purchased out by a wealthy patron, or retired with special permission. Even then, many found the transition difficult, as their identity was so closely tied to a place they were no longer allowed to remain. You try to recall when you last had a moment that belonged just to you. No mask, no poetry, no careful posture. The truth is, even your thoughts feel rehearsed. Your chambers are ornate, filled with painted screens and embroidered cushions. But you've learned that soft things don't guarantee softness in life. Beneath the silks and the formalities, you're tired. Not exhausted like after a long day scrubbing linens, but the kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if silence is truly restful or just lonely. Still, you persist. You apply your rouge with perfect symmetry, compose a seasonal verse about falling plum blossoms, and rehearse your shamisen tune until the strings imprint themselves on your fingers. Clients come and go, their words coated in flattery, their gifts carefully placed. You smile at the right times, laugh where expected, and pour just enough sake to let the night glide by. One scholar leaves you a haiku written on rice paper. You read it twice. It's clumsy but sincere. You tuck it behind your mirror next to a folded note from the apprentice who once gave you a carved comb. These tokens aren't love, but they remind you that something human still lingers in this polished world. Historians still debate whether life in the yukaku offered courtesans any real autonomy. On paper, they had status income and artistic prestige, but that status was conditional, earned through emotional labor and unending discipline. For many, the only true freedom was retirement, often achieved through years of savings or the favor of a client wealthy enough to buy their release. Even then, former oiran faced social stigma and limited options, especially if their education had been narrowly focused on the courtesan arts. You pause at the window of your chamber. Outside, a procession of lanterns weaves through the street like stars pulled along a thread. The air carries the scent of charcoal and blossoms. Somewhere below, a young girl in training practices her bowing technique under the watchful eye of a senior attendant. You remember that posture. You remember the ache it caused in your lower back and how long it took to do it without trembling. Inside the room is quiet again. Your breath rises in the cold air. You reach for your comb, feel the weight of your earrings, adjust the fall of your sleeve. Everything is in its place, perfectly arranged, immaculately aligned. But sometimes in moments like this, you wish something would fall out of order, just to remind you that it could. The knock on the door comes softly. You rise, glide across the tatami, and slide the screen open, with both grace and resignation. Another evening begins. You don't remember how you got here, but the shift is sudden and undeniable. The delicate rustle of silk, the perfumed stillness of Edo, all of it evaporates like breath in winter. Now it's stone, warm, dusty, sun-baked stone underfoot, and voices, so many voices. Not whispering through rice paper screens, but bellowing, laughing, barking out prices for fish olives or favors. You're in Pompei. The air smells like bread and sulfur. And you once again are a worker of affection. Except here the affection is listed clearly with a price, and carved in Latin on the wall. This is not the soft world of veiled glances and recited poetry. Here love is brisk, businesslike, and paid for up front. You are Meretrix, a legally registered prostitute in ancient Rome, and unlike in other places and times, your status isn't secret. It's printed, engraved, declared. Your name might be etched into the wall of a brothel for posterity, or at least until the next earthquake. Your workplace is a lupanar, a narrow, shadowy establishment carved out of the back streets of Pompei. The walls are decorated with frescoes of various positions, part instruction, part advertisement, part wishful thinking. There are 5 small rooms each, barely the size of a pantry. The beds are stone with thin straw mattresses laid over them. Privacy is a curtain if you're lucky. Sometimes not even that. You don't get to decorate. You don't choose your clients. But you do keep your coin. The day begins early. You step through the narrow alleyway just as the markets are setting up. Men and women mill about buying vegetables and gossiping. Some of them glance your way. Most don't. Your profession is common here, but that doesn't mean it comes without judgment. Rome is filled with contradictions. Prostitution is legal and taxed, but prostitutes are denied basic rights. You can't marry a Roman citizen. You can't testify in court. You're free technically, but tethered to a label that never quite leaves your skin. You duck into the lupanar, passing the doorman who watches the street. He nods. No words. Just recognition. Inside, a manager, more administrator than madam, keeps track of coins and customers. Some brothels are privately run. Others remarkably are owned by former slaves, who bought their freedom and went into business. You're not sure what's worse, working for a manager who counts every coin, or one who demands loyalty in exchange for vague promises of protection. There are no silks here, no perfumed baths or poetry recitals. The work is physical, immediate. Your tools are oilcloth water and endurance. The walls are thin, the schedule tighter. A client arrives and is led to a room. Payment is collected at the door, sometimes in coin, sometimes in trade. You've accepted wine bread, even a handful of fig seeds, though that one still baffles you. In the corner of the brothel there's a painted menu. Yes, an actual illustrated list of services, graphic, colorful, and very public. Historians have debated whether these menus were literal offerings, or more symbolic, meant to lure in the curious. Either way, they exist. In Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered brothels with frescoes so explicit that some museums covered them for years. The Roman attitude toward sexuality was open, even crude by later standards. But it wasn't without hypocrisy. While wealthy men could indulge freely, women in the profession were shamed for the same acts. Sound familiar? At midday, the brothel quiets. The heat presses down like a wet blanket. You wipe your brow with the corner of your tunic and sip from a clay cup of lukewarm wine. It tastes like dust and vinegar, but it dulls the ache behind your eyes. You stretch your arms and try not to think about how many more hours remain. The stone bed beneath you is cool but not soft. You wonder idly if someone ever carved their name here too. If somewhere in the grooves of this rock, a story is waiting to be remembered. There's a woman here named Livia. She's older, sharp-tongued, and refuses to take clients under 30. No one knows how she gets away with it, but she does. She once told you that the secret to surviving in a Roman brothel is knowing who to ignore and who not to. She paints her lips with crushed berries and wears a necklace made from glass beads that catch the sunlight when she turns. Her laugh is low and unapologetic. She says she plans to retire by 40 with enough money to buy a bakery. Whether she means it or not, you can't tell, but you hope she does. Outside, the streets are alive with clamor. A vendor calls out about fresh mussels. Children run past chasing a dog. Somewhere, a group of young men argue over the results of a chariot race. You lean against the doorframe and watch. Life here is loud and fast and often unfair, but it moves. Unlike Edo, where stillness felt like being trapped inside a poem, Pompeii pulses with energy that distracts you from thinking too deeply. Legally, Roman sex workers like you were required to register with the aedils officials, who maintained public order. You gave your name your fees and were expected to wear a particular garment, the toga. Yes, the same toga worn by senators, but yours was symbolic of your status, meant to set you apart from respectable women who wore stolas. The irony isn't lost on you. The city that worships Venus builds temples to desire and plasters its walls with erotic art, also demands your shame be visible in your clothing. Scholars still argue whether sex workers in ancient Rome had any real path out of their profession. Some did through freedom patronage or sheer cunning, but most remained bound by reputation, even if their purse grew fat. You could save enough to buy a home, employ others, or even own a bathhouse. but the stain of meretrix never washed off. In Latin, even the word for love amor was rarely applied to your kind. Transactions, not affection, defined your every interaction. By evening, the torches are lit. Shadows stretch long across the mosaic floors. You light a small oil lamp in your corner, adjust your tunic, and prepare for the next knock at the door. Some nights the clients are kind. They ask your name, speak gently, offer a coin for a story. Other nights they forget you're human the moment they walk in. You've learned to carry both versions of yourself, the one who smiles and the one who survives. And still strange things happen here. Tidbits, if you will. A soldier once left behind a helmet with a plum of dyed horsehair and never came back for it. Livia wears it sometimes when no one's around. A client once recited poetry from memory standing naked and drunk, while holding a bowl of figs like a crown. Another brought a rabbit as payment. It lives in the storeroom now and answers to no one. As you close the curtain behind another client, you sit for a moment, not to rest, but to breathe. You count your coins, enough to buy a new shawl, or maybe some lavender oil. You consider briefly leaving one day, buying a room in the countryside, raising goats, sleeping through the night. But even in fantasy, the city never quite lets you go. You are part of it, etched into its stones, whispered in its walls, named in its graffiti. Later you step outside. The moon hangs low over Vesuvius, pale and watchful. Somewhere to the south, the sea shimmers. You think of other lives, other cities, other names you might have carried. But for now, this is you. A name on a wall, a smile behind a curtain, a story half remembered by the stones. And the night is far from over. You don't remember closing your eyes, only the feeling of silk brushing your shoulder, and the faint scent of plum blossoms, sweet heady, and just a little sad. When you open them, the stone of Rome is gone. The streets are no longer loud. The air has shifted slower now, as if it weighs more. You are no longer standing. You are kneeling, and beneath your knees is a mat woven from straw and patience. You are in Suzhou, in the heart of Ming China, and you are a Yiji, a woman of cultivated company trained in poetry music and the art of conversation. Not quite a courtesan, not quite a servant, but someone meant to exist in the soft shadow, between admiration and ownership. There is no laughter here, not like Pompei. There is no graffiti on the wall, no garlic-scented arguments over gambling debts. Here every movement matters. Your hands pour tea with practiced grace. Your sleeves flutter just so. You have learned to smile at just the right angle. Never too wide, never too eager. Too much enthusiasm is mistaken for hunger. Too little is mistaken for pride. You live in a house of entertainments, a pleasure pavilion, but not the kind with locked doors and curtains. This one is open, elegant, and of course not quite what it seems. In Ming China, women like you are part of a long-standing tradition. The Yiji are not prostitutes in the conventional sense. You are performers, artists, muses. You recite poetry, often verses from the Tang dynasty, when literature blossomed like a riverbank in spring. Your clients come not just for touch, but for performance, for cleverness, for illusion, and yet for all your refinement you are still paid, still owned, still expected to know your place. The room you work in is softly lit, its walls painted with faded landscapes, mountains that no one here will ever visit, cranes frozen mid-flight. You wear robes dyed in shades of jade and plum. Your lips are stained with crushed flower petals, and your hair is arranged with hairpins so heavy that your neck aches if you hold still for too long. You speak in metaphors always, because saying what you actually mean would be vulgar. Clients ask for riddles. You answer with sighs. There is a lute in the corner. You've played it since you were 12, your fingers trained more strictly than most military recruits. Your songs are old sometimes, melancholy, sometimes bold, but always appropriate. Nothing too personal, nothing too hopeful. The goal is to make the guest feel clever, not to express your own feelings. You are a mirror, polished and pleasant. Your first guest tonight arrives just after sunset, trailing incense smoke and expectations. He is a minor bureaucrat, the sort who carries 2 fans and no decisions. He quotes Confucius poorly and interrupts your recitation of Li Bai with a story about his horse. You smile anyway. This is part of the job. Listening, laughing gently at unfunny jokes, pouring wine with just enough spill to suggest a moment of spontaneity. It's performance down to the breath. Later, when he finally leaves you, exhale. A real breath. A breath you couldn't take while he was there. Your friend Mei Lin passes you a piece of candied lotus root and raises an eyebrow. She's been doing this longer than you have. She once recited all of the Ballad of Mulan backward on a bet. Now she just paints. Tiny birds, mostly with one eye always slightly larger than the other. She says it makes them look curious. You wash your hands in a shallow porcelain basin. The water is scented with chrysanthemum oil. Your reflection looks back at you, soft-edged in the ripple of candlelight. You trace your lip with a finger, then adjust the angle of your hairpin. Presentation is everything. Beneath your robe, a small pocket holds the day's earnings, carefully folded notes and 1 polished silver coin, the kind that feels cool even in this summer heat. Historically, Yiji occupied a unique and often contradictory space in society. Unlike brothel workers in other cultures, many were highly educated. Some were renowned for their poetry, their calligraphy, their musical talents. They attended gatherings of scholars and literati not just as adornments, but sometimes as collaborators. A few even published collections of their work. But for every famous Yiji remembered by name, countless others existed quietly serving tea and singing for praise that rarely left the room. At midnight, the house falls quiet. You move through the corridors bare feet, making no sound on the lacquered floor. A breeze carries in the scent of rain. It hasn't started yet, but it will. You can feel it in the way the paper walls breathe. Outside, a lantern swings lazily from the eaves, its shadow bobbing like a waiting question. You sit by the window and open a book. Not a classic, but one of your own. A small notebook where you've written things you can never say aloud. Observations, hopes, a sketch of a cat you saw yesterday, a phrase you liked from a poem that made you pause. This is your real voice, scratched in ink and hidden under your bed mat. Sometimes you imagine what it would be like to hand it to someone, to have them read it and know you. But that's not what you're paid for. Tidbits abound in a place like this. One guest once insisted on being serenaded only with poems involving ducks. Another brought a gift, a carved peach made of jade that turned out to be hollow and filled with tiny dried ants. No one knows why. Mei Lin still has it on her shelf next to a painting of a frog playing the lute. Another client paid you in silkworms. You kept them. They live in a mulberry box by your window, now eating and spinning, never asking questions. There is a famous tale of Liu Rushi, a celebrated Yiji during the late Ming dynasty, who became a poet of some renown and married a scholar who respected her for her mind. Some say it was love. Others say it was survival disguised as poetry. Historians still argue whether women like Liu Rushi truly broke free of their roles, or simply created more elegant cages. In either case, her verses survive. And maybe that's something. You think about escape sometimes. Not the dramatic kind, no running into the night with your hair undone and feet bleeding. Just a quieter life. A small stall selling sesame cakes. A dog. Maybe a lover who doesn't ask for rhymes. But you always come back to the same realization you are good at this. Not because you love it, but because you've trained your entire life to be good. And skill once earned becomes its own kind of comfort. In the morning, the house will rise slowly. New robes will be chosen. Lamps will be trimmed. The poetry will begin again. But for now, you rest your chin on your hands and look at the rain as it finally begins to fall. The droplets tap against the roof like fingers on a drum. A rhythm you didn't choose, but one you know by heart. This is not a brothel in the way the West imagines it. There are no red curtains or creaking staircases. Here, beauty is the product and silence is the price. You are not bought by the hour, but by the illusion you can maintain. And in that illusion there is power. Fragile, yes. Conditional always, but power nonetheless. You close your notebook and tuck it back into its hiding place. Somewhere down the hall someone begins to play the lute. A low, wandering melody. It is not meant for clients. Not tonight. It is for no one in particular, and perhaps because of that, it's the truest song you've heard all day. And as you lie back beneath the embroidered canopy, the silk sheets whisper around your body cool against your skin. Sleep does not come easily, but at least here it's quiet. And quiet in a world full of performance might be the rarest luxury of all. The sound of rain fades, and with it the silk and poetry of Ming China dissolve into heat. Not a comforting warmth, but the heavy, slow-breathing kind that presses against your back and makes silence hum. You don't open your eyes at first because part of you already knows you've arrived somewhere new, somewhere drier, dustier, and laced with a different kind of risk. When you finally lift your head, the world has changed. The walls are stone cool and pale. The air smells of ash musk and jasmine just past its prime. You are in Cairo now, specifically in the winding lanes behind Bab Zuwayla in the early 15th century. Your name doesn't matter here. Names are fluid things. But your role is clear. You are a bathhouse attendant. Or at least that's what you are allowed to be. There are places in medieval Cairo where touch is regulated by custom, where modesty is measured in cubits of cloth, and where the law does not need to be harsh to be inescapable. You live in one of those places beneath arches softened by time behind doors that require the right kind of knock. This bathhouse hammam is your home, your shield, and occasionally your trap. Each morning begins with smoke. You rise before the sun to light the small clay brazier that warms the inner chamber. Coals are banked carefully, water poured in precise amounts to keep the steam from choking the air. The tiled floor is always slightly slick, and the walls sweat long before you do. Women come here to cleanse themselves, ritual, social, spiritual. But some come for more. And some come knowing what you really offer, if they know how to ask. Your job, at least the one people see, is simple. You scrub backs, pour water, manage herbs and scented oils. You speak little, listen always, and move without being noticed. But there are layers here. Conversations happen with eyes, with touches of a linen cloth, with the way someone requests rose water instead of orange blossom. These are the codes. You learn them the same way you learn to breathe. Prostitution was not legal in the Mamluk Sultanate of Cairo, yet it was practiced, widely regulated in some periods, violently suppressed in others. Officially, the profession did not exist. In practice, women like you operated quietly within licensed bathhouses, inns, or even private homes. You learned early that discretion wasn't just protection, it was currency. There were no brothel signs, no district with an official label. Instead, there were whispers, hand signals, and favors passed beneath the door. You are not what most people picture when they think of a brothel worker. You do not lounge in silk. You do not beckon from balconies. Your uniform is a plain linen wrap, your tools a bucket and a brush. But you have clients. They are quiet, careful, and always pay in coin, no credit, no records, nothing left behind. And you keep their secrets as you keep your own tightly wound and locked behind your teeth. The woman who trained you, Sophia, used to say that surviving in this city was like weaving on a loom made of wind. You had to feel your way through it, tugging just enough, never pulling too hard. She was missing 2 fingers on her left hand, though she never said how. You learned quickly not to ask questions unless you wanted a bucket thrown at you. You live in a small chamber behind the furnace, where the warmth seeps through the stone even at night. Your bed is a pile of wool blankets. Your belongings fit in a carved box no bigger than a bread loaf. Still, you consider yourself lucky. You eat every day. You haven't been robbed in over a year. And the roof doesn't leak unless the rain is particularly ambitious. At midday, the city roars outside, but within the bathhouse time slows. Women drift in and out, gossip, carried on low voices and steam. You hear it all: who is marrying whom, who is divorcing, who is rumored to have taken a lover from Damascus, and occasionally who is asking for special treatment. The code changes weekly. One week it's a request for an extra towel. The next it's a question about whether the rose water is fresh enough. You keep up. You have to. Tidbits abound in this kind of life, like the one regular who insists on bathing only by moonlight, claiming it cleanses the soul better, or the merchant's wife who pays in dyed fabrics instead of coin. You have a pile of yellow scarves you'll never wear. Once a guard came in claiming to be lost. He left 3 hours later without ever finding what he was supposedly looking for, and you never saw him again, except in the alley 3 nights later, asking if the moonlight bath lady was in. Despite the shadows, there are odd bursts of joy. The women sometimes sing when they think no one's listening. Someone leaves honeyed figs in your corner, wrapped in cloth with a neat stitch. A kitten wanders in every few weeks, cleans its face in the basin, and vanishes again. You've named it Ghazal. No one else knows. Historically, the role of women in Cairo's pleasure economy was complex. While male prostitutes were more openly prosecuted, and registered women operated under stricter social invisibility. Some became concubines or entertainers in wealthier households. Others, like you, worked in domestic spaces, where rules could be bent if they weren't spoken aloud. Hammams were not officially brothels, but they offered a private space where women could interact outside the watchful eyes of family or authorities. Historians still argue whether this system offered women a form of agency, or simply disguised their exploitation in more acceptable wrapping. The hardest part of this life isn't the work, it's the watching. Watching people walk away, clients, friends, even rivals. Watching girls come in full of fire, only to leave quiet, half-burnt. You learn not to get attached. You nod, you smile, you survive. That's the game. Tonight a storm creeps in from the desert. Not rain dust. The kind that turns the air orange and makes every breath taste like brick. You seal the doors with wet cloth, bank the fire, and retreat into your room. There's a note beneath your pillow. No name, just a charcoal drawing of a lily. You fold it carefully and place it in the carved box with your scarves and coins. You don't know who leaves them. You don't ask. As you lie down, your body aches. Not from work, your muscles are used to that, but from the constant bending, listening, deflecting. You close your eyes and let the hum of the city wrap around you like gauze. Somewhere nearby, a muezzin calls out the evening prayer. The sound drifts through the walls, softened by steam and silence. In this life, you don't get grand endings. You get small mercies, a good meal, a quiet night, a client who leaves without breaking anything. You cling to them like thread, not to weave a future, just to patch the present. Tomorrow the water will boil again. The women will arrive with their secrets. You will smile, nod, and carry on. And in the quiet corners beneath the scent of lavender and ash, you will continue doing what women like you have always done, survive by being unseen, unspoken, and utterly essential. The world turns again as quietly and suddenly as a change in breath. Cairo's steam and coated gazes fade, replaced now by perfume, and parquet floors that creak like secrets. You don't wake up this time so much as find yourself already dressed in velvet, no less sitting on a silk-upholstered chair in the drawing room of a well-appointed Parisian townhouse. Outside, it's the 1780s or perhaps the 1820s dates bend a little here, but the setting remains the same, the kind of home where nothing is urgent except appearance, and the only danger is being forgotten. You are not a servant, not technically. You are not a wife either, not legally. You are something in between. A kept woman, as society would say, with a knowing glance and a tilt of the head. a mistress, a courtesan, a companion of leisure. There are many names, but none of them describe how carefully you've constructed your place in this house, or how easily it could all disappear. You live in comfort, at least on the surface. Your bed has a feather mattress. Your wardrobe includes imported silks and gloves with pearl buttons. There is a mirror in your room so large it requires its own wall. In it, you look like someone who has won the game of womanhood. But the mirror doesn't reflect what it took to get here, or what it costs to stay. Each morning the maid delivers breakfast on a tray so ornate it weighs more than the food. She nods politely, never meeting your eye for too long. She knows what you are. You smile anyway. Then you spend an hour preparing your face, not just with rouge and powder, but with the practiced expressions of someone who must always appear interested, never needy, and effortlessly enchanting even when your stomach clenches with boredom or dread. Your benefactor Henri, or perhaps Claude, depending on the decade, arrives when he wants and leaves when he chooses. He funds this life. The dresses the apartment, the quiet servants who appear and vanish like chess pieces. In return, you provide companionship charm and just enough unpredictability to remain interesting. If you fail in any of these, there's always another woman waiting with brighter eyes and fewer opinions. You are not allowed to age here. Aging is for wives. You must remain in bloom perpetually. And that's not just poetic. Your real job is to embody a fantasy, not a timeline. A single wrinkle, a forgotten appointment, a tired sigh too many, and the game is over. The velvet curtains might stay, but you won't. Historically, women in your position, mistresses, courtesans, demi-mondaines, occupied a curious space in European society. Especially in France, from the late 18th century through the Belle Époque, they could rise to considerable influence, even amass wealth and fame. Some, like Madame de Pompadour, became political advisors and trendsetters. Others, like Liane de Pougy or Cora Pearl, were immortalized in literature and scandal sheets. But for every celebrated mistress, there were hundreds more whose names vanished the moment their patrons lost interest or money. There are rules to this life, though they are never spoken. Never ask too many questions. Never remind him of obligations. Never be too clever unless he's in the mood for wit, in which case be brilliant, but not challenging. Always laugh at his jokes. Always look grateful. And never ever forget you are replaceable. Polished, perfumed, perfectly positioned, but never permanent. The other women, you know those in similar arrangements, gather sometimes for tea or theater pretending friendship, while calculating one another's status. Who received a diamond bracelet? Who was invited to the summer estate? Who got quietly dismissed with nothing but a trunk and a note? You smile with them, sip delicately, and file every detail away. This isn't just socializing, it's reconnaissance. At night, when the candles are low and the noise has faded, you sit by the window and stare out over the rooftops. You imagine what it would be like to own something your name on a deed, your choice of visitors, your own key to the door. But that's not how this works. Everything around you is borrowed, even the silence. Sometimes you write letters you'll never send. To your mother who thinks you married well. To the girl you once were who dreamed of becoming an actress or a painter. To the future where you might be remembered as more than someone's favorite Tuesday distraction. You keep these letters hidden behind a loose panel in the floor, next to the little tin of coins you've managed to save. Not much, but it's yours. There's a tidbit you remember from another courtesan whispered at a masquerade ball. One woman kept a live canary in her dressing room, and used its reaction to judge whether the perfume was too strong that day. If the bird looked woozy, she toned it down. You tried it once. The bird flew out the window. You took it as a sign and switched to lavender. You've had lovers' patrons and passing visitors who gifted you everything from Persian rugs to opium-soaked poetry. One left you a dachshund, another a set of antique spoons. You still have the dog. The spoons were pawned for medicine last winter. No one knows. You smiled through it all. Historians still debate whether women like you had real power or whether it was all an illusion wrapped in lace. Some argue that courtesans manipulated the elite, subtly shaping art politics and fashion. Others believe they were little more than high-class prisoners, admired and adorned, but ultimately voiceless. You've lived enough of this life to know the answer isn't tidy. Power here is conditional. It depends not on who you are, but who sees you. There are evenings when Henri forgets your name, not because he's cruel, though sometimes he is, but because you've become background, like the candelabras or the rug. When that happens, you smile extra brightly. You refill his glass before he asks. And later, when the room is empty and your dress is back on its hanger, you stand in front of the mirror and remind yourself of your own name. Whisper it once, twice, until it sticks. The danger isn't being dismissed, it's being erased. Once long ago, before velvet and tea roses, you thought this life would be glamorous. And in many ways it is. You've walked through marble halls. You've eaten food with names you can't pronounce. You've had artists paint you, musicians write for you, and strangers envy you. But glamour, you've learned, is just hardship in better lighting. Tonight the city buzzes with revolution or opera, you can't tell which. You slip off your shoes, walk to the window and watch the lamps flicker below. Somewhere a girl just like you is stepping into a townhouse for the first time, her hands trembling with excitement. You hope she learns quickly. You hope she survives. And if she ever ends up here draped in velvet, silenced by wealth, you hope she finds the loose panel in the floor, and the letters, and the name inside them. The velvet drapes of Paris fall away slowly like the hem of a too heavy gown, brushing the floor for the last time. You barely feel the shift until the air warms, until the scent of dust and crushed flowers gives way to something richer, earth firewood, and the faint resinous perfume of shea butter. You are in West Africa now, the Mali Empire. It is the 14th century, perhaps earlier. The river Niger winds not far from where you stand, slow and glistening, under a midday sun that does not know how to be gentle. You're dressed in layers of indigo-dyed cotton, hand-woven and waxed to a gleam. Your wrists clink with bangles. Your hair is threaded with amber beads and cowrie shells. You wear beauty like armor. Your expression is composed, your back straight. You are not just a woman here. You are a wife, a ritual wife, a sacred wife. And those two words mean everything and yet tell you almost nothing. Your marriage was not made in secret. It was a public elaborate affair, blessed by griots and sanctified with dance. Drummers played until the dust lifted from the ground. Elders sprinkled millet and water. Your union was arranged not by romance, but by politics, by lineage, by symbols older than the empire itself. You belong not only to a man, but to an institution, to a custom, to a network of meaning, etched into every bead on your belt. You are one of several wives. Not the first, perhaps not the favorite, but you are the one chosen for ceremonies, for appearances, for things that require a calm smile and a steady gaze. You sit beside your husband during public festivals, your posture flawless, your silence meaningful. He speaks for both of you. He receives the gifts. You receive the glances, sometimes admiring, sometimes assessing, always measuring. To the outside world, you are privileged. You live in a compound with separate quarters. You do not haul water. Your meals are cooked for you often with peanut stew and fresh okra, sometimes with lamb if the hunt was good. You have apprentices, young girls, who watch your every move, who copy how you tie your wrapper, how you grind the henna, how you nod at your husband's words. You are a model of propriety, an emblem of grace. You are everything you're supposed to be, but you are also invisible in the places that matter. You do not choose your schedule. You do not initiate your presence. When you walk, it is always to somewhere someone else has requested. Even your garments, though beautiful, were chosen for what they represent, not what you love. Blue is for serenity, gold for loyalty, red for fertility, Your favorite color? No one asks. Historically, ritual wives in parts of the Sahel, including the Mali Empire, were selected from specific noble lineages or spiritual backgrounds. These women often served symbolic roles in dynastic or religious events. Some were sequestered, others moved freely but under constant surveillance. Their marriages were less about domestic intimacy and more about reinforcing sacred ancestral or royal legitimacy. You are adorned not just for yourself, but as a living representation of your husband's honor. His wealth is judged by how richly you are dressed, his virtue by how respectfully you behave. When people look at you, they're not really looking at you, they're reading you like a scroll, and you've learned to be legible. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sunrise when the heat still slumbers and the birds begin their slow chorus, you wonder what it would feel like to be plain, to walk down the road unadorned, to sit in the marketplace without every eye trailing your footsteps. You wonder what your laughter sounds like when it isn't calculated. You wonder how your hair would feel if you weren't always pulling it into ceremonial styles so tight they leave your scalp aching. But you never say these things aloud. Such questions are considered indulgent, even dangerous. Your life is defined by clarity, not curiosity. Questions belong to griots, to travelers, to strangers, not to wives. A favorite tidbit shared among other women, always in hushed tones, never in front of elders, is the story of a ritual wife who once refused to attend a major festival because she had a toothache. The palace brought in a healer, a new dress, and an entire backup goat just to coax her out. She appeared eventually, but wore her sandals backward the whole time. No one dared comment. The symbolism was confusing. Some read it as protest, others as spiritual possession. Either way, it's now part of the local mythology. You sometimes think of her when your sandals rub blisters. A quiet rebellion, soft, strange, and entirely deniable. You keep your secrets small, a pebble hidden in the folds of your sash, a song hummed off-key in the storehouse, a poem scratched into the underside of your calabash. Nothing that could be considered disrespectful, nothing that could be traced. But these small acts remind you that you exist, not just as a function, but as a person. Historians still debate the actual agency of these sacred wives. Some believe they wielded quiet influence behind the scenes advising their husbands, or shaping ceremonial outcomes. Others argue they were largely symbolic present, but unheard, serving more as ceremonial objects than participants. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. A spectrum of voices, some soft, some swallowed. Today is a festival day. You are dressed in your finest wrappers embroidered with gold thread. Your arms are coated in scented oil. Your face is traced with red clay. As you emerge from the women's quarters, drummers begin to play. Children scatter flower petals before you. It is your role to look calm, to bless the community, simply by being present. You do not speak. You do not blink too much. You certainly do not sneeze. You walk beside your husband, whose tunic is equally fine. He greets elders, accepts offerings, makes proclamations. You hold a fan and nod gracefully. Everyone watches. Every movement, every moment is recorded, not in writing, but in memory passed on by the griots, stored in song, preserved in rhythm. And yet beneath the layers of symbolism, beneath the practiced smile, and the perfumed air, you are still you. You are still the girl who used to climb the baobab tree barefoot, who once ate a mango so ripe it stained your dress and you laughed until your ribs hurt. You are still there inside, folded into the fabric, like a secret stitch no one notices, unless they look very closely. At night, after the festival ends and the drums fade into embers, you slip off your jewelry piece by piece. Each bangle clicks like a whispered sigh. You wrap your hair in soft cloth. You sit by the fire pit and watch the flames curl like smoke, writing a forgotten story. And for a moment, just one before the day begins again, you are not a symbol. You are not a ritual. You are not a reflection of someone else's power. You are just a woman. And you are still awake, You've walked through candlelit corridors in Bruges, recited poetry in silk-draped halls in Ming China, waited quietly beneath painted ceilings in Edo, and stirred bathwater, thick with secrets, in Cairo. You've counted coins in the dirt floors of Pompeii and wiped lipstick from wine goblets in velvet-wrapped salons of Paris. Through each of these places you wore a different name. Sometimes courtisan, sometimes companion, sometimes just wife. Never anonymous, but never truly seen. The cities may have changed the languages, the fabrics, even the beds, but certain things remained curiously constant. The transaction was always more than money. Sometimes it was safety. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was the illusion of choice dressed up in perfume and a ribbon. And across time, whether your name was chiseled into stone or whispered behind fans, you remained caught in that quiet in-between. Respected, perhaps, but rarely free. In Bruges, the rules were scrolled in crooked script and hung beside the stairs. You knew them by heart and ignored them when necessary. You counted towels, bruises, and rumors. There a goat ate better than some of your guests. In Edo, you walked with elegance so precise it hurt. Each step mapped each hair combed into a script older than your name. You wore shoes you couldn't run in. You smiled with your mouth, but never your eyes. In ancient Pompeii, your name might still be there, scratched into a brothel wall, a painted menu of services, long since blurred by ash. You might have offered laughter, or more likely just a warm place to forget the noise of empire. You were taxed, inspected, and named in public records, yet not considered a citizen. A citizen could vote. You could vanish. In Ming China, your life was poetry, but not your own. You played the pipa and served tea with hands trained to move like calligraphy. Your value was tied to your skills, your brushwork, your song, the way you bowed, but not to your thoughts. They said you were cultured. They meant you were trained. They said you were respected. They meant you were silent. In Cairo, you learned discretion as a form of self-defense. Your job was not just survival, but to make that survival invisible. You operated in corners. Your voice was soft, your glances coded. You learned the rhythms of incense smoke, the weight of silence, the danger in being noticed. If you were clever, you stayed unnoticed. If you were lucky, you were mistaken for furniture. In Paris, you were wrapped in velvet and called beloved, but only until the next season's fashions changed. You had champagne and chandeliers, but also rules, unspoken ones. You must not age. You must not complain. You must not hope for anything other than what you already had. You were a favored until you weren't. Then you were a cautionary tale told in whispers behind closed doors. And in Mali, you were sacred, but you were also stilled. You were draped in tradition, praised in proverbs, but always moving in a choreography someone else set. You were visible in rituals, invisible in decisions, revered but rarely heard. Across all these centuries, a strange irony lingers. The closer you were to power, the quieter you had to be. The more beautiful the dress, the more controlled the gesture. The more elegant the performance, the more confined the stage. Some women played the part with grace, others with quiet resistance. Some disappeared into legend. Others disappeared entirely. Mainstream history often forgets these women, not because they lacked significance, but because they left few written records. Ink was reserved for kings' laws and battles, not for the woman who stitched her sorrow into embroidery, or left a lock of hair under a floorboard, not for the madam who bribed the guard or the singer who poured arsenic into her tea before the prince could return. History remembers architects and assassins, but rarely the courtesan who shielded her friend from disease with a clean rag and a whispered warning. But some stories linger, like that Roman graffiti scrawled in a backroom brothel that reads, "Here worked Fortunata, twice as sweet as honey," or the Edo courtesan who wrote her own poetry under a pen name and slipped copies to visiting scholars, or the woman in Bruges who once refused a client so powerful that it made the city gossip for weeks. He came back a month later. She made him scrub his own boots. Tidbits like these are the scattered threads of something larger, a tapestry that was never finished, but still exists in the corners of dusty archives and whispered folklore. They are evidence that even in constraint, there was cleverness. Even in silence, there was strategy. These women navigated systems they didn't build using tools they weren't given to create space where none existed. Historians still debate how much power these women truly held. Some argue they were victims of their time trapped in roles that dehumanized them. Others suggest they were cultural arbiters, holding influence in salons, brothels, and royal courts alike, shaping taste poetry and politics. The truth may be both. They were marginalized and influential, celebrated and discarded, protected and endangered all at once. What unites them isn't just their roles or their dresses, but the way they endured, the way they adapted, deflected, survived. Some with laughter, some with lies, some with love, though that was often a luxury too rare to last. What unites them is the fact that even now, hundreds of years later, their lives still echo in museum placards, in buried court records, in the shape of a painted fan, in the faint ink of a city census that lists only first names. And what unites them with you, dear listener, is that flicker of recognition, that moment when you realize that the world they lived in may be centuries gone, but the questions remain. Who gets to be remembered? Who gets to speak? Who gets to choose? You've traveled through time tonight, through velvet dust, incense, and cold stone. You've stepped over broken floorboards and into golden slippers. You've worn smiles that weren't yours and carried burdens no one thanked you for. And now, as this journey ends, you stand in the threshold of all of it, between stories told and stories lost, between memory and myth. Some women left no words behind, just gestures, just habits, just a tendency for the women who came after to look out the window and wonder, what would she have done? And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what survival really looks like. Not always loud, not always named, but never fully erased. And you standing here listening now are part of that legacy, a witness, a keeper of stories, and maybe, just maybe, a better dreamer because of them. Now the house is quiet again. The lanterns are out. The doors, those old creaking things, are finally closed. No footsteps echo in the hallway. No coins jingle on the table. Only the hush of sleep settling like dust across the floorboards. You've wandered through centuries tonight, past silk screens and stone walls, through candle smoke and violet dawn. You've stepped into shoes that pinched and rooms that whispered. And though the faces changed, the questions stayed the same. What does it mean to survive, to belong, to endure when you are both seen and overlooked? Some of the women you met tonight vanished without stories. Others left behind only half-remembered names scratched in ledgers or painted on fading walls. But they were here. And for a while tonight you walked beside them. So breathe slowly now. Let the weight of the journey drift off your shoulders. There are no more rooms to check, no more coins to count. Just you resting in the stillness, carrying memories not your own, yet somehow familiar. The night holds them all, the laughter, the longing, the cleverness behind tired smiles, the quiet rebellion woven into a hem, the choices made with little choice at all. And now the only thing left to do is close your eyes. Let the story fold itself into dream. Let the past fade like music at the end of a song. Sleep well, time traveler. We'll visit another forgotten corner of history soon. You've walked through candlelit corridors in Bruges, recited poetry in silk-draped halls in Ming China, waited quietly beneath painted ceilings in Edo, and stirred bathwater, thick with secrets, in Cairo. You've counted coins in the dirt floors of Pompei and wiped lipstick from wine goblets in velvet-wrapped salons of Paris. Through each of these places you wore a different name. Sometimes courtisan, sometimes companion, sometimes just wife. Never anonymous, but never truly seen. The cities may have changed the languages, the fabrics, even the beds, But certain things remained curiously constant. The transaction was always more than money. Sometimes it was safety. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was the illusion of choice dressed up in perfume and a ribbon. And across time, whether your name was chiseled into stone or whispered behind fans, you remained caught in that quiet in-between. Respected, perhaps, but rarely free. In Bruges, the rules were scrolled in crooked script and hung beside the stairs. You knew them by heart and ignored them when necessary. You counted towels, bruises, and rumors. There a goat ate better than some of your guests. In Edo, you walked with elegance so precise it hurt. Each step mapped each hair combed into a script older than your name. You wore shoes you couldn't run in. You smiled with your mouth, but never your eyes. In ancient Pompeii, your name might still be there, scratched into a brothel wall, a painted menu of services, long since blurred by ash. You might have offered laughter, or more likely just a warm place to forget the noise of empire. You were taxed, inspected, and named in public records, yet not considered a citizen. A citizen could vote. You could vanish. In Ming China, your life was poetry, but not your own. You played the pipa and served tea with hands trained to move like calligraphy. Your value was tied to your skills, your brushwork, your song the way you bowed, but not to your thoughts. They said you were cultured. They meant you were trained. They said you were respected. They meant you were silent. In Cairo, you learned discretion as a form of self-defense. Your job was not just survival, but to make that survival invisible. You operated in corners. Your voice was soft, your glances coded. You learned the rhythms of incense smoke, the weight of silence, the danger in being noticed. If you were clever, you stayed unnoticed. If you were lucky, you were mistaken for furniture. In Paris, you were wrapped in velvet and called beloved, but only until the next season's fashions changed. You had champagne and chandeliers, but also rules, unspoken ones. You must not age. You must not complain. You must not hope for anything other than what you already had. You were a favored until you weren't. Then you were a cautionary tale told in whispers behind closed doors. And in Mali, you were sacred. But you were also stilled. You were draped in tradition, praised in proverbs, but always moving in a choreography someone else set. You were visible in rituals, invisible in decisions, revered but rarely heard. Across all these centuries, a strange irony lingers. The closer you were to power, the quieter you had to be. The more beautiful the dress, the more controlled the gesture. The more elegant the performance, the more confined the stage. Some women played the part with grace, others with quiet resistance. Some disappeared into legend. Others disappeared entirely. Mainstream history often forgets these women, not because they lacked significance, but because they left few written records. Ink was reserved for kings' laws and battles, not for the woman who stitched her sorrow into embroidery, or left a lock of hair under a floorboard, not for the madam who bribed the guard or the singer who poured arsenic into her tea before the prince could return. History remembers architects and assassins, but rarely the courtisan who shielded her friend from disease with a clean rag and a whispered warning. But some stories linger, like that Roman graffiti scrawled in a backroom brothel that reads, "Here worked Fortunata, twice as sweet as honey," or the Edo courtesan who wrote her own poetry under a pen name and slipped copies to visiting scholars, or the woman in Bruges who once refused a client so powerful that it made the city gossip for weeks. He came back a month later. She made him scrub his own boots. Tidbits like these are the scattered threads of something larger, a tapestry that was never finished, but still exists in the corners of dusty archives and whispered folklore. They are evidence that even in constraint, there was cleverness. Even in silence, there was strategy. These women navigated systems they didn't build using tools they weren't given to create space where none existed. Historians still debate how much power these women truly held. Some argue they were victims of their time, trapped in roles that dehumanized them. Others suggest they were cultural arbiters, holding influence in salons, brothels, and royal courts alike, shaping taste poetry and politics. The truth may be both. They were marginalized and influential, celebrated and discarded, protected and endangered all at once. What unites them isn't just their roles or their dresses, but the way they endured, the way they adapted, deflected, survived. Some with laughter, some with lies, some with love, though that was often a luxury too rare to last. What unites them is the fact that even now, hundreds of years later, their lives still echo in museum placards, in buried court records, in the shape of a painted fan, in the faint ink of a city census that lists only first names. And what unites them with you, dear listener, is that flicker of recognition, that moment when you realize that the world they lived in may be centuries gone, but the questions remain. Who gets to be remembered? Who gets to speak? Who gets to choose? You've traveled through time tonight, through velvet dust, incense, and cold stone. You've stepped over broken floorboards and into golden slippers. You've worn smiles that weren't yours and carried burdens no one thanked you for. And now, as this journey ends, you stand in the threshold of all of it, between stories told and stories lost, between memory and myth. Some women left no words behind, just gestures, just habits, just a tendency for the women who came after to look out the window and wonder, what would she have done? And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what survival really looks like. Not always loud, not always named, but never fully erased. And you standing here listening now are part of that legacy, a witness, a keeper of stories, and maybe, just maybe, a better dreamer because of them.